Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little topic that I thought was very particularly interesting. And I thought, all in all, the reason why I would talk about it is just because, of course, this is going to be a topic about one of the bigger, younger superstars in all of boxing. Probably the biggest young superstar in all of boxing, at least when we talk about one that really has not won a world title yet. And of course, that is Mr. Ryan Garcia. Ryan Garcia, of course, and I know a certain amount of people, they basically say, oh, well, he's not really that big of a star, overall. What has he done? He's not selling pay per views, right? He's not selling pay per views, but you know how I can tell that Ryan Garcia is a big star or a big star in the making overall if he does end up winning some of those big fights later on. It's because whenever overall there's any news about this kid, it always blows up. It doesn't matter overall if Ryan Garcia drops a potato chip on the floor. There's always something in the news about what is going on with this kid. So, like I said, no matter what people say, you can tell that Ryan Garcia, he has a certain amount of star appeal. He has overall the quote unquote good looks for a certain amount of people to sell him overall as a brand when it comes down to it. And I think Oscar De La Hoya realizes that. And on top of that, he is decently gifted, especially on the athletic ability. But the big question is about Ryan Garcia, and that I've had about Ryan Garcia pretty much ever since that I have seen him. How motivated is he really for the sport of boxing in the first place? And apparently, in recent news, Mr. Ryan Garcia, he has now left the Canelo Alvarez team, which of course is mainly trained by that of Eddie Reynoso. And I believe there's certain fighters that include not only solo Canelo Alvarez, but of course Andy Ruiz Jr. as well. And I believe also, who the hell's the other fighter? Oh yeah, Oscar Valdez. There may be a few other fighters there as well, but I just don't know. Well, apparently Ryan Garcia, in recent news, apparently he ended up leaving the Eddie Reynoso team and ended up leaving Team Canelo Alvarez to join up with, of course, another good professional coach in Joe Goosen. Now, Joe Goosen, when it comes down to it, I don't really know all the fighters that he necessarily has on his boxing resume. The last fighter that I know that he trained overall, and he actually trained him decently well, was Chris Arreola for the Andy Ruiz Jr. fight. And I'll give Joe Goosen a hell of a lot of credit because Chris Arreola, even though he clearly lost the fight, for that point in time in his career, for him to even be somewhat competitive against Andy Ruiz Jr., that means that Joe Goosen must have trained him very well, had him overall in very good conditioning, and on top of that, that he must have had a very decent game plan for him. He even was able to knock down Andy Ruiz, I believe, once or twice in that fight. But the big question about Ryan Garcia for me is this. How motivated are you really for boxing anyway? And I've already stated this, in a Deontay Wilder video that I made about a few videos ago, where Deontay Wilder, he was talking about possible retirement. And I'm on basically this opinion. Because the sport of boxing, in my opinion, this is not just a sport all in all that you just play around in. This is a sport all in all to where you can suffer a hell of a lot of damage. And even just one wrong punch, if it lands on you correctly when it comes down to it, or the right punch, it can damage you for life. It can cause you to get punch drunk, or who knows, you may even end up being in an accident like Pritchard Cologne, to where basically you can't even talk or you can't even move for the rest of your life, or you may end up being another Gerald McClellan, something like that if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. So this sport is nothing to mess around in. Boxing at times it can be a very brutal sport when it comes down to it. The chances overall of someone actually getting killed in the ring, from what we've seen, of course, from the majority of standards, it doesn't seem likely high. But at the end of the day, boxing still is a mainly damaged sport. It just is what it is. And I remember all in all, actually, just to give a little bit of a backstory about me, when it comes down to it, there was once upon a time where I actually was very serious about trying to get into professional boxing myself. I was trying to get into an amateur program and yada, 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 yada. I used to spar all the time at the gym when it came down to it with with certain sparring partners. And I'm not gonna overall, claim overall that I was just the best around when it came down to it, but I don't think I was necessarily bad at boxing. Boxing was always one of the sports that, in my opinion, I always was a tad bit more talented in than some of the other sports. My main sports, of course, for those of you that don't know, were mainly boxing and tennis. But if you're going to get into a professional sport, and especially in that of boxing, I think that you almost really have to eat, shit, and breathe the sport. And in terms of me, when it comes down to it, in a way, I am obsessed with the sport of boxing. But I think that after a while, I just took a look at it and I said, you know what? Would I really be willing to do, 10-mile runs at certain times if I needed to repeatedly on a weekly, maybe even daily basis? Would I really overall be able to do the exercises and the dieting that overall I would need to? Would I really overall be willing to do the training that some of these guys do? Would I really overall be able to have the same amount of discipline as some of these other fighters? And on top of that, I'm going in the ring, or you're going in the ring with certain guys that they're not only overall looking to win the fight, they're really looking to put an ass whooping on you. And that's the thing about boxing. A lot of these guys, when it comes down to it, some of these guys, they don't come from very great backgrounds. They use a lot of negative energy overall in that ring when it comes down to it. And some of these guys, they're not even just looking overall to win the fight. They're almost looking for a body on the record. They're looking to kill you. And I know a certain amount of people, they'll say, well, you're sounding a little bit too intense. You're kind of taking it too far. I don't think that I am at all. There's been a multitude of boxers that have stated that in the past, whether it be Mike Tyson, Deontay Wilder, a few others. Some of these boxers, when it comes down to it, they may seem very, very nice outside the ring, but once that switch hits inside the ring, they'll kill you if they have to. Because basically, like I said, they look at it basically, not only do I have to defend my manhood and my honor in this ring when it comes down to it against you about who is the better fighter, all in all, but on top of that, if I lose this fight, it takes money out of my bank account. It puts food off of my family's plate. And on top of that, I need to propel my career. So if I have to overall, very badly injure you, even if it comes down to that point, I will, and don't think that I won't. It just is what it is. So boxers, in a certain way, they pretty much almost are trained killers. It just is what it is. They're almost, in a way, pretty much overall like trained Navy SEALs or trained CIA agents, almost like a Jason Bourne when it comes down to it. Because at the end of the day, this is a combat sport. And there has been a certain amount of people overall that have died in the boxing ring or suffered very, very traumatic injuries in the boxing ring because they ended up getting hit a certain way. It just is what it is. At least that's my perspective on it. So at the end of the day, the big question about Ryan Garcia is, or overall if someone is just trying to get into boxing, how motivated are you for boxing? Is this really something overall that you want to go through repeatedly? Do you really want to continue getting in the fights, especially all in all, if you're a person that does not seem to be willing to run the miles or punch the heavy bag a certain amount of times a day, do the push-ups when it comes down to it, do the sit-ups, do the exercises, do everything that you need to do in training. And on top of that, do you still have the hunger? Do you still have the motivation? When it comes to some of the greatest boxers of all time, what they really all had in common, in my opinion, is that basically, and if you're a super competitive person, in my opinion, you pretty much overall know what I'm talking about. Now maybe it's not in boxing, maybe it's in something else. Maybe you play video games, or maybe all in all, you do something else. But if you're a competitive person, and if you're a very, very competitive person, all in all that there is never enough wins. There are certain boxers out there that basically the only reason why they retired is because their body really can no longer handle it anymore. Trust me, if Manny Pacquiao won that last fight against Yordenis Ugas, I have no doubt about it in my mind whatsoever. He would be continuing to fight today. There are certain fighters, all in all, that if they could fight till they were to die, they would overall do that because they just love the sport so much. And overall, a lot of these athletes, when it comes down to it, they do have the mentality of conquerors. And if you overall are a true conqueror, if you're a person, all in all, that really, really does love competition, there's never enough wins overall for you to get. There's never enough overall places for you to conquer. There's never overall enough wins on your record. You always want to take it to that next level, especially if you are that hungry. And that's what I've seen with Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Manny Pacquiao. And that's what I see overall with Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, he has that type of all-time great hunger to where basically it doesn't matter what level he's on. Canelo Alvarez is always taking a look at things and saying, you know what? How can I even take this to the next level? How can I even take this to a point to where almost no one else is going to take it to? And when I just take a look at Ryan Garcia, I just don't know if I see that from him. And that's why I think Canelo Alvarez, when he talks about Ryan Garcia, I think that there's almost a little bit of disdain in his voice. And I think that Canelo says, you know what? If this dude overall were truly serious about becoming a great like me, I think all in all he would be in the gym like me. He would try to learn like me. He would try to spar with a lot of people like me. He would try to overall learn certain techniques like me, but he doesn't seem anywhere near as motivated. And of course, there is the saying that, and overall, I grew up with parents, or at least one parent overall, that ended up growing up on a farm. So this was quite common when I was growing up. But you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. And that's kind of the thing overall about Ryan Garcia, or anyone that seems to have a lack of motivation overall for what their profession is. If you seem to overall have overall a lack of motivation, or all in all, you don't seem to have the same hunger as some of these other boxers out there, in my opinion, the best idea for you to do would be to retire. But the big question is about Ryan Garcia is, how motivated is he really? Do I think all in all that maybe there's a possibility that Eddie Reynoso and Canelo Alvarez, that they said, you know what, we don't want you any longer at this gym? I think that there's a very decent possibility of that. Or maybe Ryan Garcia said, you know what, I don't like the way that you guys talked about me. You made me look bad when it came down to it. You said that I wasn't motivated. I'm going to move on. Listen, either way, I don't think that always doing a coach change, I don't think that it's necessarily bad. But at the end of the day, I think that Ryan Garcia, he's really overall going to have to show us that he truly is motivated for this sport. Because like I said, for you to be into boxing, you almost pretty much have to be obsessed with it. You almost have to do basically nothing else. It is your life. It is your job. It just is what it is. So we'll see all in all what Ryan Garcia does. It'll be very interesting. Of course, he does have that fight, I believe, against that African fighter as of next. But that really is not going to be the fight that tells us all in all how serious and how true Ryan Garcia is in this sport. You know, he is overall going to have to get a very decent fight, maybe even against Jojo Diaz or Isaac Pitbull Cruz. I think that either of those fights would be very great. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. We'll see all in all what happens with Mr. Ryan Garcia. But it'll be very, very interesting. And we will see all in all how well this Joe Goosens change does. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.